This presentation is about the goddess. The goddess is in front of us right now. It is the screen you're looking at. It is the room you're in. It is the thoughts and feelings you are having now. It is the whole of nature. This goddess is everywhere. And it's not different from yourself. Yourself is just projecting itself in all these appearances. And this is the simplicity of the subject. So we're going to pause there, as we normally do in the School of Philosophy and Economic Science. So let's pause. And be aware of this goddess which is all around. Om Paramatmane Namah. Atah. To the Supreme Self, a bow. But what I particularly want to concentrate upon today is Om. Because for me, this was perhaps the most vivid experience of the goddess which I had as a teenager. I was in a room in Oxfordshire and with a number of young people, and we were taken through the sounding of Om. This was one of my first introductions to the Sanskrit language. We sounded Ah, Ooh, and then Om. This went on for a long time. I must admit, as a teenager, it seemed to be a very long time. But at the end of that hour, it was most miraculous. I was just aware of consciousness, just aware of the presence of the goddess. It was all around, it was everywhere in that room. That room was teeming with consciousness. And it must have been from the sounding of Om that this took place. I knew that the goddess was myself. And this is the key. Dare I say it, I think this is the key to life, to realize that everything you are experiencing, is yourself. And this, I submit, is awakening the goddess. So let's have a look at a PowerPoint. So, awakening the goddess, and in a way, the goddess is already awake. We don't need to awaken the goddess. The goddess couldn't be asleep. This is consciousness, this is ourself. But the appearance is that we do need to wake up the goddess because there are various difficulties, impediments to seeing that goddess. We forget that goddess. We think we're separate from the things in front of us. So a large part of this lecture is going to be about how we can awaken the goddess in the sense that, yes, she's already awake, but we may not perceive it. So let's explore this area. And as I said, I'm going to focus on Om. Now, since Om is said to be the first sound of this creation, this is a very big subject. And there are many ways one could view Om, but I'm going to suggest some ways. First of all, our true nature is said to be Sat, Chit, and Ananda, being, consciousness, and bliss. And one could look at the constituents of Om in this way. The A is simply being. Sat, the present participle of the verb to be. The U is consciousness, knowledge, because when one is present, one knows what to do, one knows what to say. And the is the bliss, and this comes with being present and being conscious. At this level, it's very difficult to differentiate, but if we are to differentiate, perhaps this is the way we could look at it. Our true nature is being, consciousness, and bliss. It's all very well to say that, of course, but is that our experience all the time? Perhaps not. So we do need some spiritual practices. And these three spiritual practices on the screen now, I would submit, are the fundamental practices for spirituality, for realizing that goddess. The R is attention. And the teacher we have referred to in this school, Sri Shantananda Saraswati, said the point of attention would have it all. Whatever one's doing, one needs to focus, one needs to rest exactly where the work is taking place. One can then use that attention in all sorts of ways, and one of the most effective ways of using it is to study. This is the U. One needs to turn one's attention to the words of the wise. And finally, one needs to come to rest through meditation, through reflection, and through the pause, such as we practiced at the beginning of this session. So let's look at this in a little more detail. Attention to the working surfaces, or perhaps more accurately, resting the attention where the working surfaces meet, or even in the space between the working surfaces. We may not always find ourselves in such a dramatic situation as this man here, but in fact, every task we engage upon requires total attention. It means not entertaining desires, personal desires that is, but rather letting the attention rest precisely where the work is taking place. This is actually sat, this is actually being present. Study of the words of the wise. Here's someone studying, and it reminded me of when I was a teenager, there was a certain book which I came across called World Within the Mind. I don't know if you've come across that book. It's actually a translation of part of the Yoga Vasishta. It's the most remarkable book. And I had a copy of it, but it fell apart because I read it so much. I estimated that I'd probably read the book in my teens about 200 times. I didn't want to move on to any other book because I was so enamored of this book. It was so beautiful, and it had everything I needed at the time. And so study doesn't require many words. What it requires is depth. What it requires is real connection with a few words. So it's this reflective study which we need to adopt. And this is where the study of Sanskrit is particularly useful. But we'll say more of this anon. Next, rest in meditation and reflection, and pausing, of course. We need to set aside time each day to meditate, to reflect, and this requires a discipline where this happens every day. Study needs to be every day as well. It's like taking a bath or a shower. One needs to do it regularly. And in this way, the mind and the whole inner being can be kept clear. It can gradually be refined. And in this way, the goddess can become more and more apparent in our everyday life. So let's look at this inner being. There are many ways to look at this inner being, but this is one way. And we've actually moved around the sounds here. We're starting with the then going to u, then to a. So the is perhaps the deepest aspect of this, the heart. Heart is a vague word, really. The Sanskrit word here is Chitta, which actually means perception. This is the act of perception, the state of perception, or that by which there is perception. So this is the heart, Chitta. This is where all the impressions are held. The U is the intellect, the buddhi. The buddhi is that which is awake, really. It could be the state of awakening, or that by which awakening takes place. So the buddhi is very important in this whole process. And again, the study of Sanskrita has the ability to clarify the buddhi, like nothing else in my experience. And finally, we could regard here in this context as the personality, the Ahankara. So again, look at this. Let's look at this in a bit more detail. The Chitta, and there is a discipline here that the heart, one should always keep the heart open and as far as possible, free from desire. And in this way, this heart can be clarified. The Chitta is where all the impressions are held from previous lives, if we buy into that, and indeed in this life. So if one can clarify, if one can purify, if you like, the Chitta, then the self shining everywhere, the goddess, if you like, is so much more apparent. And this obviously is a gradual step-by-step process, but the whole of the spiritual work is aimed at this. The buddhi, and one could say the same about the buddhi. This needs to be clarified. The buddhi needs to be engaged with the teaching, with these simple concepts of attention, resting the attention exactly where the work is taking place, engaging with the words of the wise, engaging the mind with the teaching, and clarifying the buddhi through the practices of meditation, reflection, and falling still. Now, Ahankara has often got a bad press, but it needn't. The pure Ahankara, the Sat Ahankara, is essential in this work. We need to use the talents we have. We need to use our personality, whatever that is. And each of us will have a personality. This is, if you like, the face we show to the world. And that face needs to be such that there is the clarity whereby the talents one has can be used in service. And this is where service really comes in. Service to the teaching, service to one's family, service to one's friends, service to the community, service to the nation, and service to the world, and dare I say it, even the universe. This concept of service needs to be as wide as possible. So we move from the individual to the universal. Another way of looking at Om is to look at universal qualities. Ah is the wealth, again, the most obvious. And what a wealth this world has. I was just down near Exeter the last week, and we were going into the countryside, and it is exquisite. The countryside is so beautiful, and the goddess is so obvious when one has such beauty in front of one's eyes, and the planet Earth is beautiful. It is full of wealth, and that wealth can just be enjoyed. The trick, though, is not to run after that wealth, not to covet that wealth, but just to enjoy it as an expression of oneself. The U is the knowledge, and there are all sorts of knowledge, of course, available. The universal knowledge is the knowledge which informs this universe, the laws of creation, the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, the beautiful workings of this universe. That knowledge, too, is the goddess. And is service, and every creature is playing its part, is playing its role, is acting in service. And as human beings, we can then participate in this service. And if we do, we find that there is freedom. So let's look at this in a bit more detail. And here we come to the Sanskrit names for the goddess. Wealth is Lakshmi. Laksh is to perceive, to see. And it has another meaning, to aim at. The point is that when we see the goddess, she can take us to the ultimate being. By seeing the real nature of the goddess, by seeing it as ourselves, we are aimed at, if you like, the ultimate being. The tradition says that she points out the Shiva, and the Shiva is that in which everything rests. Saraswati, she who has the flow. And this wisdom, this creation is full of flow. Knowledge is flowing all the time. Service is flowing all the time. There is a flow going on in this great sacrifice, which is this world. We just need to join in with this flow. And it's significant here that the two teachers that we have referred to in this philosophy school, Sri Shantananda Saraswati and Sri Vasudevananda Saraswati, are both called Saraswati. It indicates the knowledge which can flow through a human being. And Parvati, etymologically, this is from pur, to fill, because the goddess fills this universe. Her presence is there everywhere. So we have she who is seen everywhere and leads us to that ultimate, the Lakshmi. We have she who is flowing everywhere through knowledge, that's the Saraswati, and she who fills this universe, Parvati. But in this lecture, this is the annual language lecture, so we're going to concentrate on the goddess of speech. the goddess of speech has a particular role to play here, particularly for the human beings, because it is through speech, through language, that this ultimate may be realized. In fact, this is the only way it can be realized. It does require language, as we will hear a little later from Sri Shantananda Saraswati. Service is necessary, of course. All these things which we've spoken of are necessary in the path, but in the end, we are dealing with words. Philosophy is communicated by words. That's what's happening now. If we weren't told about the ultimate, it would be very difficult to come to any realization of the ultimate. So Saraswati, the goddess of speech, is crucial in philosophy. She exists in 4 states. And here again, we've reversed the order, because all speech, all sound, all creation starts with Om. And then it differentiates, or seems to differentiate. The here is what's called seeing, pashyanti in Sanskrit. And this is the area of the heart, presided over by Parvati and her consort Shiva. Shiva, as I've said, is that in which everything rests, and Parvati is she who fills that space, if you like. This level of the heart is very important, because if we have clarity of heart, the sound comes through purely. If there are impediments, difficulties, then the sound may come through less purely. So this is the seeing area where one can watch, and one needs to be very still in order to access this area. But it is possible to rest there. Then one sees the words coming into mind. This is the Madhyama. And when one sees them coming into mind, they start to take on sentences, words. So Saraswati presides over the words and the sentences. So this is the middle ground. As you're listening to this presentation, see if it's possible to rest behind the words in this seeing, pashyanti area. In fact, you are resting there. It just requires a little stillness. And one can take this further. One can even rest, as it were, beyond the pashyanti, beyond the heart, just by being present. And then once the words have gone through the mind, taken up the grammar, if you like, of Saraswati, the words of Saraswati, it then comes out onto the tongue, into the spoken word, onto the bodily level in the context of a human being. And this is presided over by Lakshmi, she who is seen everywhere, who leads one back to the ultimate. Her consort is Vishnu, that which pervades everything, that which has entered into everything, from wish to enter into. Now, of course, when we attempt through philosophy to return to ourself, to realize the ultimate, we first of all have to start with the spoken word. But then if we have the proper training of mind, we can then take it back into understanding in the mind. And of course, we're trained in the English language, so when we're told something about philosophy in English, we can understand it. And we can take those words to heart, moving back to the . The great thing is, though, if we can familiarize ourselves with the Sanskrit language, we can use the Sanskrit words, and these have a great power to take us back to the deeper levels. So this is the science, if you like, of speech, and it's very simple. It can be practiced anytime. It can be practiced now. Sri Shantananda Saraswati said, unless the individual receives the Veda back in the Supreme, there is no possibility of liberation. And here, I'd just like to speak of a story which there is in the tradition. It's an odd story, but a very significant one. Saraswati is the projection, if you like, of Brahma. Brahma, it is said, when he first created this creation, he was a little uneasy because he felt that there wasn't much form. There weren't any forms anywhere. There was just himself. And he thought, well, how am I going to create a great creation? How could I go about this? So he thought, I need some help. I need a power. Let's project something from my mouth. And he projected the goddess Saraswati. Of course, Saraswati was non-different from Brahma because Brahma only had himself with which to create this creation. But unfortunately, Brahma forgot that Saraswati was his own self. He saw the beautiful creation of Saraswati because Saraswati created a most magnificent creation. She created the planets, she created the galaxies, she created the whole universe. She created all this magnificent creation with her words, because all the creation, according to this tradition, comes from sound and words. He thought, what a marvelous creation. Brahma thought, I am so enamored of this creation, and he became rather obsessed with his own creation, Saraswati. He became rather proud of his own creation. He became proud of his powers to create. And he thought that he was better than Vishnu and even better than Shiva. So pride stepped in when he felt that his creation was different from himself. And he wanted to admire his creation all the time. So he had 4 heads, one facing north, one south, one east, and one west. And it said that with each of these heads, he was sounding one of the Vedas, the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, the Yajur Veda, and the Atharva Veda. Then a strange thing happened. Saraswati jumped over his head. And he thought, I wish to keep Saraswati still in my view. So he sprouted a 5th head on top of his head. But this 5th head was superfluous. It is said that this 5th head made an ugly sound, an evil sound. Brahma had gone over the top, if you like, and Shiva had noticed this. Shiva wanted to correct Brahma, so he chopped off the 5th head of Brahma. Brahma, upon seeing his fault, was grateful to Shiva. And ever since then, Brahma has been reciting the 4 Vedas. So what's this story about? This superfluous head comes from seeing the creation, this beautiful creation, as separate from ourselves. And once we see it as separate from ourselves, we chase after things. We are proud about things. we claim things. This is the only mistake. This beautiful creation, this goddess which is all around us, is only ourself. And if we can rest in that place where it's known that all this in front of us is only ourself, then that is liberation. And why Shiva? Well, you can see from the screen that Saraswati needs to go back into the into the Shiva, that in which everything rests. And we too can rest in that in which everything rests. And ultimately, we can revert to Para, the Supreme, which is Om. And this is what Sri Shantananda Saraswati meant when he said this. Unless the individual receives the Veda back in the Supreme, in Para, there is no possibility of liberation. There's one other quotation which I'd like to finish with. He also said around the same time, one should get closer to the realm of understanding. This is possible only through the study of language. I do not mean Sanskrit. I mean the language. Of course, Sanskrit alone is capable of leading one to that language. One should study it systematically. This requires a great deal of understanding as to what this is saying. But he's indicating that one needs to get behind all spoken languages. He's recommending the study of Sanskrit to achieve this, but he's pointing us to the language with a capital L. This is going beyond all language. When we reflect on the great statements from the wise, we can experience this. We can go beyond the words, back into the here, back into this pashyanti, this heart area, back into Om. And this really is the whole purpose of our study of Sanskrita, to lead back to this ultimate. So, I'm now going to pass over to my wife, Elena, who has kindly agreed to recite some verses in praise of the goddess.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here listening to us. I'm going to recite today the Medha Suktam, which is a Vedic text about Saraswati. Before I start, I'm going to read just a small bit of the translation, which we've translated for children, because we are teaching this to children right now. So just a small bit of it, and then I'll recite the Sanskrit. So, let the goddess of intellect come with joy. She with happy mind is everywhere. May we, who were grief-stricken before, she came, become greatly intelligent and know the ultimate. By your grace, O Shining one becomes wise, creative, and radiant. By your grace, O effulgent intelligence, one finds wealth of all kinds. I'm now going to put on my Tanpura drone. This will keep me in tune. Here we go. Om Medha Devi Joshamana Na Aga Ad Vishvachi Bhadra Sumanasyamana tvaya jushta nudamana durukta an brihadvadema vidate suvira aha tvaya jushta rishir bhavati devitvaya brahma gata shri rutatvaya tvaya jushtaschitram vindate vasusano jushasvadraveno namedhe medhamma indro dadatu medhan devi saraswati medhamme ashwina bhuvavadhattam pushkara sraja apsarasu chaya medha gandharveshu chayanmanaha daivi medha saraswati sama medha surabhir joshatag swaha ama medha surabhir vishvarupa hiranyavarna jagati jagamya urjasvati payasa pinvamana sama medha supratika jushantam mai medham mai prajam mai yagnistejo dadhatu mai medham mai prajam mai indra indriyan dadhatu mai medham mai prajam mai suryo bhrajo dadhatu om hamsa hamsaya vidmahe paramahamsaya dhimahi tanno hamsa prachodayat om shanti shanti shanti